Hey everyone, it's Rick, and thanks for joining me on another Inwyt Walkabout. I'm celebrating the 4th of July weekend in Cambridge, England, visiting my son who's studying here, and then moving on to Nottingham, England, where my wife is going to be doing a course for a week, and I'm tagging along and working from here. It's a beautiful morning in a park in one of the areas that's close to the downtown of Cambridge. Just give you a quick scan view here. The sun is coming out. As in the US, there's a heat wave, so we're enjoying unusual warmth. And here we are, change of scenery. I wanted to talk today a little about independence and perhaps put a different spin on, this weekend where everybody's celebrating 250 years of independence from this country that I'm in. And I wanted to share a couple of anecdotes, a couple of experiences that maybe link to that for us to consider. One of the things that's always fun to do here in Cambridge is on the River Cam, and one of the fun things to do here is to go punting, to go on a boat, and essentially similar to what happens in Venice is to be guided down the Cam and to see the university colleges, the different historical sites that are quite spectacular from a different perspective. And yesterday we were doing that, and as we were waiting for our punt, it's very busy. It's graduation here, lots of tourists anyway, but just extra visitors in general. We had to wait, and there was about an hour wait for us to get on our boat. And as our time came, the people who were the tour guides were doing their best to get everybody on the boats. Everybody was scrambling, demanding to be put on a punt in time, a boat, and getting frustrated when that wasn't happening. And it was, again, interesting to kind of watch the reactions of people who really had a hard time waiting and felt like they should be prioritized over others, and essentially doing their best to hold it in, but at the same time venting their frustrations on people who were doing their best to get us on the boats. And it reminded me also of a time, probably about a year ago, where I had a similar experience myself, where I was moving my daughter from one apartment to another at college, and where my son and I were picking up a U-Haul, and it was a busy time of year. It was September when everybody was making their moves, and I had rented a van in one location, and on the day of was informed that they didn't have any vans and that I needed to go to another location to pick up the van where it would be waiting. And so I went over there, arrived, and same thing, super busy, everybody scrambling to get vans and different rental equipments. And I get to the counter and basically am informed that they had no idea that I was being transferred from the other location, and that they didn't have a van. And so I was upset, and I basically said, well, you better find me a van, because I'm being run around here, and I made a reservation months ago. And it was my son who kind of gently tapped my shoulder and said, we don't have to act like this. Let's just take a more proactive stance to trying to solve this. And lo and behold, eventually it worked out, and we did get our van. But it was, again, a little bit of a reminder, and again, a little bit of a wake up, where I sort of noted my own impatience and reaction, sort of my angry reaction, and kind of watched it and sort of recognized that that was not what I wanted to, how I wanted to show up and how I wanted to basically solve this problem. And so, again, it was perhaps a little bit of an awareness, a little bit of a wake up to behaviors that probably all of us innately have at different times, where something is not the way we think it is or the way it should be, and basically have our opposite of what we think should be. I shouldn't be waiting for a van. I should have a van that I've reserved. So, what's the point of this, and why am I bringing this up on Independence Day weekend? Well, I think one of the interesting things when you start to look at these personal experiences and perhaps how it translates into a national imperative or a movement towards independence or a declaration of independence, is that in many ways there is a very similar parallel in response, and I'll say escalation of response, where something is going on where we think it's wrong, or we think we're being oppressed, or we think we're being forced to do things that we don't want to do. And at some point, we say, this is not okay, we should do something else. And I think what's interesting to observe when you actually start to look at this is how our interpretation and our focus really is, again, off the mark. We're really not having an in-depth understanding of why we're in the position that we're in, psychologically, for wanting change, and what the root of it is. And again, there's always some sort of an external perpetrator, an external something to blame for the behavior and the reaction and the frustration and the conflict that we ourselves experience in those settings. And so I'm sort of reminded of the observation that generally speaking, opposites always contain their opposite. So if you basically say, this is what I think is going on and this is what I think should be, the should be is always a response to what you think is. And generally, what should be always has an element and comes from its opposite, right? It's not new. It's a reaction to something that is going on, and for which, even though you don't understand it, it's the only thing you know. And so you basically say, I don't want to do that. I want to do the opposite. And so when you think about dependence, we have the Declaration of Independence, which basically is a statement and an observation, or maybe not an observation, but deep down it is essentially saying we are dependent and we want independence. And so we, sort of define our independence as being something that is not what is, it's the opposite. And it's much easier to look at the outside response, as in our Declaration of Independence is independence from British rule, from the tyranny of the King of England at the time, and saying we don't want that, we want our independence from that, we want our freedom. And what's really interesting to look at, I hadn't done this, but I was kind of curious as I was thinking about my own stories and just reflecting on, the politics in the world and our own politics, is I actually went back and just read the Declaration of Independence, because it's been a long time since I've done that. And I think what's really interesting, again, it doesn't matter what your political affiliation is that the elements and the rationale for the Declaration of Independence in 1776 has tremendous similarities to our current state. And, not just how government and our way of living in the United States is currently, but when you look globally, it's also extremely similar as far as what we are trying to get away from. And lo and behold, here we are, pretty much in very similar circumstances. You just have to change the characters a little bit, and there you are, sort of in the same spot. So it's not about, again, looking at anything outwardly as much as it is reflecting on how the parallels of what I shared with you with regard to the van, or with regard to waiting for the punt, or politics, or anything else, ultimately comes back to us as individuals. And where at its core, when you really look at the underlying behavior and the mechanisms for why we are where we are, is that we're always trying to somehow get away from our ongoing dependence on something. And, it's easy, again, to point outwardly and say, I'm dependent on this, or I don't want to be dependent on this, and I shouldn't be doing that, and I should try to find, the reason why I get upset when things don't go the way I want. We're looking for a specific analytic experience to say that's why it happened. When I was a child, I had this experience, and now I am angry when I don't get what I want. And, again, I think at the end of the day, the point is, it doesn't matter what a specific episode is, as much as, again, the mechanism by which we always try to assign blame, which is that, again, when you come to thought, it's really about expectations, and really about observing how our thought process is always doing a comparison to some set of values, traditions, expectations, experiences, beliefs, all those things that become our anchor of dependence, and for which we essentially look at everything that we're doing through that lens. And when it doesn't line up, then, we want change. We want independence. And so it's less, if you look at things, it's much less about trying to run away from a particular type of experience, as much as it is recognizing that as long as we have our anchor of dependence in all the things that we have been taught and conditioned with, really, to uphold, that as long as we anchor ourselves to that, that is our dependence. And we're always striving to relieve ourselves of that dependence, so that we can, quote, be independent. But we don't see that we're doing that. And so we just keep going in circles. So as you think about Independence Day today, take a look at the Declaration of Independence, and just reflect on how similar circumstances actually are to what they were 250 years ago, with different players, different scenarios, but basically the same thing. And reflect on what it really means to be independent and where that starts. So that's it for today. I'll leave you again with the view of one of the churches here in Cambridge. I hope you have a wonderful holiday weekend as it closes out, a great week, and I look forward to next time. This is Rick with Inwyt Walkabout. Take care.